it's hilarious. It's like you couldn't plan on it.
Settle down. 7 o'clock.
That is funny.
Please rise, join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. May be seated. Meeting of the Wahoo City Council, Tuesday, September 13th, 2022, 7 o'clock p.m. Announcement of the Open Meetings Act is posted on the wall over here. If you want more information, we have some pamphlets at City Hall. Call the meeting to order and roll call.
Creachy.
Here.
Warford.
Here.
Ideas.
Here.
Nagel.
Here.
Rappel.
Here.
Boot. Here.
Okay, anyone in the audience have any comments on items that are not posted on the agenda? Seeing none, last call. Any comments, items not on the agenda? We'll move forward. Department head reports. I'll start over here, Kevin.
Nothing to add to the report that's in your packet.
What's in the packet? Okay. Travis, any report other than what's from your meeting?
No.
Okay.
Nothing new at this moment, no.
Okay. EMS, Grant?
Nothing to report this week, sorry.
Okay. Chief?
The only thing I would just comment, we did have, last Saturday, pretty successful event, down at the park, 5K in the rain for, teammates. I think, Michelle Lavalley and Palin, big organizers of it, they're helpers. I think they raised several $1,000s for teammates and, everybody that helped out, I'd like to say thanks. So it was a pretty good event.
Okay. Denise in here? Okay, she has a report in here, so,
She went to another meeting. She's there.
okay.
I'm sure you guys have all noticed the 2022 overlay project. They did complete the milling on Beach Street, and I believe they've done there was maybe 3 areas that needed to be patched and repaired, so they have moved forward with that, and I believe they're gonna be doing overlay tomorrow. Once that overlay is complete on Beach Street, then they're gonna be moving to Linden Street. We have the state's concurrence on closing out the Safe Routes to School project. There was some issues with some of the storm sewer inlets on Hackberry Street, north of 15th. We were able to come to a negotiated agreement with JEO and Collins on, actually some of that work is outside of the eligibility for the 80-20 share. And so we've worked with JEO to, they've accepted responsibility for some of the errors that took place, and so we have received payment for them for that portion of the work. So that project will be getting closed out. Today we had a meeting on the Chestnut Street project, working to get that closed out as well, and there's, I felt like we made some progress, and then there was one of the street light poles that actually broke off this afternoon as they were doing some work, and so we have some issues that we need to work through to figure out what exactly is going on that. So I've been working on budget. We had the budget hearing, obviously. We have a light and substandard report that's going to be coming to you in October for the Phelps property located south of Casey's. We have a public hearing notice in the newspaper. We're going to be sending out notice to all of the taxing entities for the Planning Commission hearing. And that is also available, will be available early next week on the city's website for people to review. We've been working on Wilmer Ridge, maybe not quite as heartily with budget out of the way. We'll be working on that, but that is moving forward as well. They submitted for their final plat, which does have some of the concerns addressed about the second entrance that was expressed by the Planning Commission. at the hearing on the preliminary plat. Trying to think if there's anything else that we have. There's lots of things going on, but project-wise, I think that pretty much sums it up. I know I'm forgetting something, but.
Anybody have any questions of any of the department heads in their reports? Okay, and none. Consent agenda, pretty much the normal.
Motion to approve consent agenda?
Second.
Motion been made, seconded, you get that? Okay.
The only question I have is we're asking for a part-time building inspector rather than full-time. We want part-time help.
Yes.
Any other questions? Roll call on the consent agenda.
Warford,
Yes.
Krejci,
Yes.
Ideas.
Yes.
Nagel,
Yes.
Rappel,
Yes.
Booth.
Yes.
Discussion items not requiring action. Nothing there, public hearings or associated action items, no old or tabled business. So we'll move to action items not requiring a public hearing. This has been discussed a little bit. Approval of an ordinance number 2395 to vacate 4th Street west of Chestnut Street.
West of Locust Street.
Locust? Yep, Locust, sorry. Any discussion on that?
Give me your definition of vacate.
So the request came in, and we talked about this briefly before, that the property owner to the north of that, which is, I can't remember his name. He wants to build a building, and because that street has not been ever improved, there are a lot of utilities in there, so we intend to vacate and retain ownership of it. So it was, what it accomplishes for the individual is allowing them to have not have a front yard setback on the south side of their property facing 4th Street,
Where there is no street.
where there is no street, correct?
Yeah, so the intention being you would vacate it as a public road, but continue to own it as public space.
Yes.
Why was this carried over? I don't recall. I remember
Because
talking
we
about this.
needed to provide the adjacent property owners with opportunity to, and I think Harry's. here.
Yeah, Harry's a adjoining property owner. You want to speak to? Come to the mic and introduce yourself. We all know you, but
Yeah, I'm Harry Falke, and I own the property directly south of 4th Street. And actually, I'm just here for information. I'm trying to figure out, here, I want to know, number one, why they're vacating the street, and Melissa may have, alluded to that to some degree. And the other thing is the use of it. What's going to happen once it's vacated, as long as the city retains the ownership of it. Because generally, the city does not ever retain ownership. It usually passes on to the adjoining property owners. But I know you have the right to do that, so I'm not questioning that. I just want to know what the use is going to be once it's vacated.
So right now, like I said, there are a lot of utilities in that right of way. And eventually, as part of our we actually have this laid out in our master trails plan, would be a trail connection that would use that corridor area to provide a area for a trail.
And then where would the trail go? Further west? I mean, does it go?
We
Does the
realize that
city have property there or what?
there are some property acquisition issues that we have to work through, but going from Hackberry Street along that rail corridor to Locust Street, and then eventually tie, in the master trails plan, it's to tie down to First and Chestnut.
Okay.
area.
And there's also a drainage ditch, that
Yeah.
kind of runs through there, and I don't know what you do with that. The thing is, the city has owned that property apparently ever since the city was platted, as far as I know. But we adjoining property owners have been mowing that for years.
thank you.
I don't think the city ever mows that. And I think Mr. Wotipka and Tim and I and the bigger staffs have always taken care of that property. And so I wondered if, once the city takes it, are you gonna mow it?
it is city property.
Yeah.
So we'll have to send ourselves a nuisance notice if nobody gets it done.
Okay.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, well, that was my only questions. I just kinda wanna know. I didn't want you to put a dump for dead animals or something in there, so, all right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, and for, you guys are aware of this, but for Harry's edification, we discussed at the last meeting whether or not it made sense to vacate it, record an easement against it, and then get rid of the underlying fee simple rights. But I think the discussion was, because of the trail issue, because it's really unknown ultimately what that space may be used for, it made more sense to simply retain fee simple title and decide down the road if there's a reason to narrow it or do something else.
So from my point of view, or at least for how I understand this, we're really not doing anything with the property other than saying it's not a street anymore, so he can build closer to it.
Correct.
Other than that, we're not changing anything about what we're doing there, or what's happening. Nothing changes other than on paper, he can now build closer because we're not calling it a street anymore.
Correct.
Doesn't have to be a setback.
And the city has to mow it.
Think about
If
it.
they stop mowing, it could have been that way for the last, since the city was platted, so.
So I would move to introduce an ordinance then, to approve the vacation of the street, not the sale of it, but just vacating it as a street.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the ordinance.
To introduce the ordinance.
Oh, yeah.
Motion to waive the
excuse me,
three readings.
It's been a while since we've had.
Second that.
Have a motion to waive the
Motion to
three readings.
waive the three. Second, roll call on the motion to waive the three.
Creachy,
Readings.
Yes.
Nagel,
Yes.
Boop,
Yes.
Grapple,
Yes.
Ideas,
Yes.
Warford.
Yes.
Okay, now action on the approval of the ordinance. Any questions? Roll call.
Creachy,
Yes.
Warford,
Yes.
Grapple,
Yes.
Nagel,
Yes.
Boop,
Yes.
Ideas.
Yes.
Okay. Turn the page. Approval of ordinance number 2396, conditional use permit for expansion of Wahoo Locker. Some of you were at the planning, zoning meeting. Travis, you want to comment any, or you want?
Sorry, we did have the public hearing at the last
Yeah.
meeting, and you asked for information in terms of location of trail, like a cross-section of that. I actually did work with JEO, but they did not have time to get that completed for your review for this meeting, so
Okay.
that's still outstanding information.
Anybody, Charlie, I know you have some thoughts.
I guess the other thing I wanted to make sure, I believe I misspoke in the last meeting and said it was a 90-foot right-of-way. That's not accurate. It was an 80-foot wide street, and there was 10 feet of it on the west side that was vacated for when Charlie's existing building was constructed by the Burns. So there's a 70-foot of right-of-way between his property line where he wants to build and his current building. So there's 70 feet of right-of-way instead of 90, like I said.
But it still is Maple Street
It still is Maple Street.
with
right
some
away.
vacation along the west side.
Go ahead, Charlie, with your thoughts.
I guess first of all, I'm gonna kind of explain things like maybe wasn't clear on last time, so I'm clear this time. First of all, that cold storage over there, some discussion was on semis pulling up there and offloading and such. There may be some, obviously, but that is not the sole purpose of this whole project. It's more the product that we build at our place, especially like wild game product, where we build a mass amount, like in a 2 to 3 week window, and then we use it for the next 6 or 8 weeks. A lot of that product would go over there with a forklift and go into cold storage. Semis would not be backed up to the doors. Those doors are at zero, whatever, ground level. So there's no dock or semi-docks to speak of or anything like that. It's mainly just for us to put a pallet in there, and then we can take a forklift or a pallet jack and move it around inside the freezer. there's concerns on, the last meeting was concerns on the garage doors. I guess one question for all you guys is, exactly what are those concerns? Maybe I can answer those for you too. The majority of the product that goes into them freezers will be loaded out that front door as individual orders for customers. Not saying that I won't take a pallet off of a semi and put it in there, but that's not the main thing that we're doing.
So those are mainly receiving product that's you have processed, put into those storage units.
Right.
Could be some activity. The semis will pull in north and south. The trail's over here, it wouldn't be on the trail. And then customers picking up their product would come through the front door.
They'd come through the front door, correct. The big doors on the garage, where the garage doors would be, would not be feasible to even load out individual orders,
Yeah.
for customers. So, and then the front will be, workspace and, retail space to wait on the customers during the busy time. I guess I'm here if anyone has any more questions, so we're clear on everything.
Is there a reason why you have to have 4 on that side?
Simplicity. I don't have to, I suppose. I would need, well, I'll explain what my thought process was, and, anything probably could be changed, I have to have something,
Right.
okay. But the reason is, the one door on the far north is in the dry storage area. So like when we do gift baskets for Christmas time, and we want to put boxes in there, we want to put stuff in there that we're going to use for all these gift baskets and all the cellophane wrap, we can open up a garage door and just set it in there, and then close the garage door down, because you can't put a pallet through the front door. So that's one door. The next one is going to line up with a cooler, just a refrigerated, it's all part of one component, but one part of that is only refrigerated, not frozen. So that's the second door. And the third and the fourth door is both would be freezer doors. So I don't really need third and fourth. I would need one of those, I guess, to get into the freezer. I can move around in the freezer at that point.
The question we've had internally, as staff has talked about this, obviously we talked about the trail and any potential conflicts with that. But also, if Maple Street ends up being a paved street, if there's a way to put in the trail as well as a paved street in there, then you're proposing basically your loading area directly butting up to the street, right? You're using if you look across the street to the north where the Eagles is, there's a sidewalk along the street, then there's parking.
Okay,
And what
right.
you're proposing is having those essentially eliminated and you being able to drive right up to the side of your building. So you're using the public right of way for your, basically your loading approach, right?
Right.
I guess I just wanna make sure that that's something we're fully considering, understanding,
There's another thought there. I mean, if it would help you guys, what about a one-way street there? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. What if there were a one-way?
Well, we were talking about just conditional use, it's conditions, we get to review these on, it's not like permanent changes forever, even though it will be a building, but, what we think it is, what we want it to be today and where we're gonna be 10 and 20 years from now, we're conditional use, so we can change things, I guess. The doors themselves, the dimensions are, I can't read that, so I have to-
In 8 foot wide by 9 foot, I think.
Garage door.
Yeah, garage door.
With Melissa, my thought the whole time has been, I find it strange to think that we're using the city's right of way for its loading zone for all intents and purposes. However, I guess my question is it in our master plan? Has it ever been brought up? Has it ever been a thought? At what point do we think we're ever gonna put that street back through or put a street through there? Is that something we see on our horizon right now? Because if not, I'm with Stu, it's conditional and we can deal with that.
We can make that a condition.
But I also
When
don't
we're-
wanna make it say, hey, yeah, go ahead and build the building,
Yeah, but
and then
next
like,
week we
well,
do it.
3 years from
Yeah,
now,
that's
we're
right.
like, no, put
Yeah.
that street,
Yeah,
we're
that
gonna
would not
make
be
a curb
fair.
right there, and you
Yeah.
can't use it.
But what about the bakery? They park semis in the street, and unload semis in the street, Dollar General does it.
But they're going right up through a parking lot, and there is still the curb there where you're parking up to it. You obviously wouldn't park in front of his loading doors, so you're taking out the entire section of what would be parking there, which is what makes it strange. I'm not saying impossible, I'm saying strange.
But I mean, the whole parking the semi there and unloading it.
That, I agree.
I don't know why the issue is, because we don't have an issue with Dollar General or the bakery.
I don't have
I
a
don't-
problem with the semi there at all, I'm just
It's-
thinking about
it's-
the loading doors facing the
Right,
street.
but Dollar General, they load in one door, and they're not using a forklift in and out of the door. Same with the bakery, there's a guy with a,
And
Right.
his last.
Well, that's what we
he
would
said
do
he's
too,
like
I
3 or
guess, is
4
we're not gonna have all 4
trips
doors
across
open
there
and
in a
have 4
week.
trucks there, and, you know, it would still be one door. I mean, yes, there's 4 doors, I get it, but we're not gonna use all 4 doors loading in and out.
Sure.
I understand your vision of, oh my gosh, there's 2 semis backed up and there's 4 forklifts and there's, that ain't gonna be like that. I mean.
It's not a warehouse. It's
No, it's not a warehouse, mainly, it's my own storage is what it is, but, yeah.
I wanna make sure that we're thinking it through fully, so that 10 years down the road, if we decide, say for instance, that Maple Street is an area where we want to expand parking, you know. Yes, it's a narrower right-of-way, but we could put parking on one side, make it a one-way street, we'd have 20 more parking stalls, if that's, you know. I'm not against your project, I just wanna make sure that we're thinking about it
Right.
completely
Right.
before
Yeah.
allowing you to make the investment in something that is, yeah, it's a conditional use, but what if we come down 5 years down the road and say, well, gosh, you know, we've kind of changed our mind.
Right.
So that's what I was asking, is there anything in our plan, I mean, you talk about the trail and the master plan, stuff like that, is there anything that's been brought up or said about adding the
I
street
would
in
say
there at
Maple
this
Street
point?
has never been, that area has never been in the 1 and 6 year road plan.
Because a block south of there, there's no,
Right.
nothing.
There's not another street past
No,
that either.
so we're
Right,
just
so you just
shortening
run
up
into
Maple
nothing.
by
Other than the
possibly
4th
1
Street.
block.
Your highest likelihood would be developing a trail that way before prior.
Which,
maybe more
again,
than a
we
road.
discussed that, and if in doing so, we would have, that trail would have to push closer to his current building, right?
Right.
To leave room for the trucks to come down and load and not be crossing over that trail.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, are we gonna ever spend money on Maple Street? Cause I drove it tonight, wow, it has built-in speed bumps in it, so it's going to deteriorate worse, do we ever plan on spending money in that area? Doesn't sound that way.
I mean, we haven't had that conversation.
Yeah.
What about,
Now you
I mean,
know.
yeah, I know, yeah. What about, I mean, a possibility of vacating Maple Street again, like we did one time? I mean, and doing away with any worries.
I'd rather talk about your conditional use and say.
I know, I don't wanna go there either, but that'd be last resort, of course. I mean, if that is the deal breaker, I mean,
In all honesty, that was my first thought, is if we were gonna go forward with that, we almost wanna vacate that, but at the same time, we don't wanna vacate the whole thing if we wanna start talking about the trail and other things that we might do with that area, so I don't know that vacating is necessarily the.
Probably
So-
best to leave some options open.
Right, only because that opened the door for a question. So if we had decided that maybe vacating was an option, then could you vacate the street and still have an easement for a future trail?
that
You-
was done,
you could-
that was done already one time.
More
Yes.
than likely, you would vacate it and maintain ownership rather than even an easement, just like we just did,
Okay,
because
yeah, just
there's a
curious.
multitude of things you would want that
Sure.
for. The only thing in my mind that doesn't make this probably appropriate for vacating is, the last one was a road to quite literally nowhere. This is in the middle of developed blocks and
Sure.
everything else, so while remote, there's always the
Yeah.
possibility you could do something.
That alley, or that street also has significant utilities. There's a 60-inch storm sewer, there's an intersector sanitary sewer line, there's overhead power line, there's a lot that's happening in that space.
I'm really glad that we have someone that wants to invest in that area. You know, if the doors, I look and say, technology, who knows how Charlie's gonna have to move his product in 10 years from now? You know, right now, we're thinking, you know, forklifts and something, who knows where you might be in a couple of years, this may evolve, you might be delivering by drones. I don't
This whole
know.
business is so different from what it was 10
Picking
years
up
ago.
out of the
and
top.
we don't know, yeah, so.
Do you care about the information that we've asked for from E JEO?
I think
Sorry,
we probably do. I was wondering if it would be the pleasure of the council to introduce it and have the first reading and then wait until we get that
And
information.
exactly what are we waiting for, then
It's a cross section that would show how the trail would lay in that space and potentially a street, if that's a route we would want.
to see how type things could get in there? Yeah, so do one reading.
Get more information for the next meeting?
I mean, I can't imagine what JO gives us is gonna really change my opinion unless it's, but that's why we should wait for the information, I suppose.
Is that ordinance in this one again? I feel like there was something also that had been sent from the planning commission that I wanted to discuss before we move forward. It's all about the facade.
Oh, the
Or
front?
something like that, something that they had
Oh, the
recommended.
front of the building?
They made some recommendation, and I wanna make sure we either address that or.
Yeah, the recommendation is to have full brick on the front.
Now you have but the current owner has no brick on his existing front, is that right? Is they're all tin now?
Correct.
Okay.
It was to match the buildings that it's,
To the-
it would be
to the
connected
east.
to on the
I
other
can
side.
see that.
And I'm more of the volition, I'd rather see it look something more like the building he does now, so people know that those two are a connected business, but that doesn't mean they're always gonna stay that way either, so. I don't know, I just wanna make sure that we address that before we move forward.
Well, I would
Good,
say.
what was the thing, excuse me, what were you saying about JEO to,
We asked
what would
them
they do, I guess, or what?
to lay out a cross-section in a couple different places with all the utilities marked, as well as a trail location and a potential street, just to help visually see how that would lay in that space.
So what are your?
But I guess that won't, what's that matter to my, just for the building's sake itself, I guess, what would that change there? You know what I mean? What would that change, I
I
guess?
guess otherwise seeing how
Depending
tight
on-
it is in there.
Depending on where the trail actually would have to lay, because if the trail had to be on the east side, then you'd be crossing the trail.
But the trail probably will be on the
Oh, I
west
see.
side.
But we don't know
I
that.
So
see.
where are utilities and everything else?
It's,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
major conflict to put it on that
If it
side.
can be far enough
It would
west.
make sense to put the other side, you know, but we don't know that, and that's what that information would be, is where the trail would have to
I
end
see.
up being placed, because if it was on the east side, then we probably wouldn't want forklifts driving over the
I see.
trail.
But a trail can be probably anywhere. East.
But, yeah, but it all depends on utilities. Cause if you put that over the system sewer, we gotta tear out the trail, that's.
Okay.
You gotta
I think we
concrete
all
down, yeah.
envisioned it being on the west side,
The west
having
side.
as tight as it
Yes,
could,
we do.
and that there would be room for things, but I think this was just to kind of confirm where the street would lay, where trail might lay, and where utilities are, and just give us all the information, I guess.
So your vision on the front, what would you like to do on the front of this building? Do you envision any type of brick, any type of?
Well, I would like to just go brick halfway up, you know, and make it look nice. It's 10,000 more to go the rest of the way, which
So what does the top look like if it's not brick? More tin like you have, or?
a dark metal tin that's gonna match the downtown brick, a dark,
Be the
Metal.
same color as the brick.
be the same
And-
color as the brick, yeah.
And the building right next door is brick and tin.
Oh, that's what the
Also,
building
like,
next door
and
is
that-
brick and
that's
tin?
He's
exactly,
matching it.
the next two are two different surfaces. Brick, half or however far up, and then another surface.
Travis, what was the logic of the planning commission in terms of all the way up as opposed, is that just a design standard type?
Yeah, just to match the
Yeah,
existing downtown building and stuff, since most of the buildings downtown are brick.
But if we're trying to match, the adjacent ones are sounds like it's halfway up. So if we get halfway, maybe we're keeping everybody
I was
happy.
thinking it was full brick, I don't know for sure though.
So is
Full
that,
brick
is
is
that
what
like,
they wanted, I think, but
That was their recommendation.
if you look up the street, it's about half or
Yeah.
50-50
It's got
and half.
the brick to the windows and then tin around the windows and then the brick above.
Oh, barrier
Oh,
for the
storage.
windows and then.
At the storage locker.
I feel like that's kinda just I suppose an opinion, I mean, cause it's nothing in writing that it has to be like that, so it's just an opinion, I suppose, which changes throughout the years, that's why we have different things downtown, you know?
Yeah, we
So-
want a little continuity and
Yeah,
So it
you know, you would
fits in.
think if it's this big of a deal, it should be written out where this is what it is, and there's no discussion about it, you know? It seems like it kinda changes, but.
So is there any interest of getting information from JEO and working on what would be included in the conditional use permit before we would move it to a second
Did
reading?
you put the brick or whatever that they had recommended into the ordinances as written now?
I haven't drafted it,
Oh, it doesn't
anything
have
as it
an ordinance
relates to that.
No,
that I'm-
Probably wait until
But
we
I'm
get
aware.
the conditional use.
It does
I
not.
was drafted, no, it does not have the brick.
It does not have the brick? I'm sorry, I'm that guy, I don't care much about the brick. I would, motion to introduce as written then without the requirements for the brick.
Do you want to require halfway or not?
Work with the staff in order to make it
Yeah.
comparable.
Yeah, comparable to surrounding buildings, I guess, but like you said, the other one is some brick, some tin. I don't know that there's gonna be any continuity no matter what you do there.
one that's stucco.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's no
that's good.
continuity down there. It's not like forcing them to make one thing is going to change the look of downtown. Yes, I'm not.
Yeah.
If you look at the attractiveness of his current building, I would anticipate he would
Yeah,
He would do it right.
build a structure that would be right.
The adjacent building does not have tin. It's brick.
Yeah,
I'm looking at it. Yeah, well, that's not
Oh,
tin in the
down
middle.
below.
I guess that's.
Yeah,
what I
in
was
the
seeing.
middle.
In the middle, sorry.
That's what I said, with
Yeah.
some brick
It
to
was
tin.
split.
It's not tin
Yeah.
at the top,
It's still about half.
it's tin in the middle.
Two surfaces.
Right.
Which
it's
is
two surfaces.
infill from the way that the building was constructed.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think those were.
Used to be
Or
windows
windows.
once upon a time.
Those are the big windows.
Yeah.
What's the council's pleasure?
I'll second the motion.
Yeah, I would say, you know, I don't mind the multi-surfaces, so if it's up to, you know, my motion would be to propose it as half brick or whatever he intends at that point. I'm not big on forcing it all the way up.
So I have a motion and a second to introduce the ordinance. And then is that,
For first reading,
and the first reading. Questions? Roll call.
Warford,
Yes.
Rappel,
yes.
Creachy,
Yes.
Booth,
Yes,
Nagel,
Yes.
Ideas.
Yes.
So between now and the next meeting, we'll get JEO, we'll get clarification
I'll
on.
bet, hopefully have it next week.
Thanks, guys.
thank you.
Okay.
Ask him where's the
Number 3, approval of contract with One Billing Solutions for EMS billing.
So forgive me, I came in a little bit late, so I haven't looked at the packet. But basically, we have a couple different items tonight on the agenda. One is a contract for a new billing company, and then a fee schedule that I think is coming up soon. So basically, long story short, we've been contracted with a company that was originally based out of Omaha, EMS Billing Services, to provide our third-party billing solution. We put a lot of trust in those companies to navigate the healthcare market, the insurance laws, whether it's CMS, Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance. There's a lot of medical, legal, ethical things that we rely on them to capitalize on to hopefully bring us, the revenues that are expected. That company went through an acquisition about a year and a half ago to a national company called QuickMed Claims, who I guess you would say was the current vendor that we were contracted with. The contract kind of carried over, so. Long story short, we've seen kind of a decrease in our revenues on the EMS billing side over the course of the last 12 to 14 months. So we did some analysis and some objective digging in terms of our open accounts receivable and those types of things. And basically, for lack of a better term, we had determined that the current billing company that's been providing those services to us have not been meeting our expectations. So we had found some measurable losses potentially because of that. We're still waiting to kind of identify that entirely, but after speaking with the city staff, with Joven, with Melissa, my recommendation and really our cumulative recommendation was that we had sent a termination agreement, a cease and desist to the current billing company to withhold all billing services from this point forward. So that way, we really didn't want to give them an opportunity to continue to either capitalize on outstanding debt or really, take advantage of us more, I guess, for lack of a better term. So it's kind of an unfortunate situation. We've spent a lot of work in the last few weeks to try to identify a vendor that we can switch to. And One Billing Solutions out of Omaha is my recommendation. So our billing rate that we pay on monies received isn't necessarily going to change at all, but we do anticipate an increase in revenues. I've spoken with their executive director in terms of kind of our open accounts receivable, and they're optimistic with your action tonight that we can get to work tomorrow and hopefully collect on some of those revenues that are outstanding still from the previous billing company. So the contract's in front of you. Joven made a few edits, mostly just terminology, I think, and pretty simple stuff. But I guess my recommendation is that we approve that contract as it is presented, and then I can turn that in tomorrow to the new company, and we can get back to work.
So with your due diligence, are there other communities that use One Billing, or I know you spent some time on it. Can you explain your process on?
Sure. So One Billing Solutions, one big key factor, we identified about 3 different potential vendors that we could utilize. One thing that really pushed me towards One Billing Solutions is they are based out of Omaha, Nebraska, and a lot of their billing staff happens to be ex-billing staff from the company we used prior to the acquisition. So they're very familiar with the Nebraska market. They're very familiar with our agencies and the uniqueness that is the rural EMS billing side of things. And I believe we're going to go back to getting, I know that we're going to go back to another benefit is we're going to have an individual biller for our account. In terms of volunteer services or smaller services, we're one of the largest in Nebraska in terms of our billing revenues. So, our fees, 15% on monies received is not a small amount of money. So, our expectation is that they're going to work for us. And so that I can now return to one point of contact for those questions. I can return to one point of contact for any legal inquiries or whatever it might be. It's going to make my life a lot easier, and hopefully we're going to see an increased revenue because of that, because they're focused on our account. Whereas prior, when that acquisition occurred, they were doing a lot of electronic automated billing practices, which would kick things out and then kick them off into the cloud somewhere else, and then nobody ever came in to check our account individually to maybe find some of those errors. So that will be mitigated. So local is a big part, having an individual biller. The other companies couldn't really promise that. And that's huge to me, I guess. We experienced that with our prior relationship with EMS billing before they went through the acquisition, and we're not happy about how it turned out. And we're hoping to kind of go back to those practices, because I can tell you that my work has tripled in terms of billing since we transitioned to Quick Med claims. Just my day-to-day, the requirements that they ask of us, just trying to stay on top of things. Like I said, we put a lot of trust in them. There's a lot of education to be acquired to really understand the practices of this, and I feel like we need to make that move. So.
In the past, we've talked about the non-collectible accounts, that these places can be either aggressive or not so aggressive. Are we still in control of some of those areas?
Yes, yeah. So one of the key factors that we identified with Quick Med claims, and one of the shortfalls was because they weren't proactively handling our billing cases the way that we had expected, they couldn't identify potential write-offs either. If you remember, in past years, we've been able to provide you a write-off report annually for the fiscal year of kind of what we closed. Those were claims that we couldn't collect on. They were unpaid bills, self-pay that decided not to pay, and we obviously don't actively send our patients to collections. This company's left everything open. So our open AR, our open accounts receivable, was a mile long. And so we don't know, whether these were third notice, whether they were second notice, whether they made it past their first notice. There was just a lot of very inconsistent data. So our goal is, in the future, one of the things that OneSource provides to us as a part of our accounts receivable report and of our claims report is that they're going to follow the practices that we expect and that we had expected under contract of going through our 3 processes and identifying those unclaimed write-offs. So I think it's a conversation for another day. Once we can identify kind of what our potential write-offs are going to be again. Typically in the past we were somewhere in the ballpark of $30,000 and $50,000 a year we were writing off. You know, we don't have good data for the last 18 months, so once we get that data, we might re-examine and look at how we can maybe collect on some of that debt, so.
And they probably can't go back and help us on the last 18 months very easily if the data is not good.
So they can and can't. So there is, depending on the insurance payer, you know, Medicare, Medicaid are more strict. Private insurances are usually a little more lenient, but they all have deadlines to file. So based on the date of service, you know, we have to file a claim within a certain amount of time. So there is a large chunk of claims that we've identified that we have exceeded the timeline to collect on. However, there are a good chunk within the last 12 months of billable claims, and our collection rate might be affected, but we're still gonna be able to collect something. And that's the one thing that I want this new company to get to work on starting tomorrow and review our open accounts receivable and help us out and get us through not only the past, but the future. So.
Motion to approve. If there's no other questions, I don't want to dominate the conversation.
I was just gonna ask, what, do you have a rough estimate of what that dollar amount might be that's outstanding that they're,
Yeah, I do.
In the long run.
I'm gonna defer to Melissa if she wants me to reveal that number or not.
Well, and the only issue is that we do have the potential, although it's not priority number one at this point, but the potential of having to go back to Quick Med and to potentially advocate for our losses and that sort of thing. So I think that's Grant's reluctance is until we go down that path of determining if we're gonna chase after them for that, try to recover some of that, settle out. I think he's probably waiting for me to advise on that.
Yeah. You're right, so.
okay, we have a motion.
I'll second.
Second. Any other discussion? Roll call?
Creachy?
Yes.
Ideas?
Yes.
Warford?
Yes.
Nagel?
Yes.
Rappel?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Approval of resolution to amend master fee schedule. There's two areas here, fee adjustments for Park and Rec and fee adjustments for EMS services.
So the Park and Rec adjustments were brought to the Finance Committee by Kevin as part of the budget process. And the EMS adjustments, we looked it makes sense to look at those as we are moving forward with a new contract. They have not been adjusted since 2017.
So specifically to the EMS rates, just to provide a little bit of update and some education. So you'll see the different rates that are on there. We have 2 BLS rates, which is determined by the level of care provided. And then we have 3 ALS rates. We have a non-emergency rate, an ALS emergency rate, otherwise referred to as a level 1, and an ALS emergency rate level 2. So the ALS 2 is the highest level of care that we provide. Usually involves pretty life-saving measures. ALS level 1 is going to be some medication administration, stuff like that. And then the non-emergency is going to be, it requires a paramedic for monitoring, but not a lot of treatments are performed. So so that's what those are. And then we have a per mile charge that we bill as well. And then we have a specialty care transport rate, which is not utilized very often. However, it was appropriate for us to set a rate because there are circumstances. We saw that with the pandemic. We were doing things that we didn't think we were going to have to do as an EMS service. So to be able to collect on some of those when we have to bring, whether it's hospital staff or specialty care transport people with us in our ambulance, allows us to collect and obtain some reimbursement at a little higher rate. So, and then the other rate in there that I'm sure will generate some questions is the standby rate. That standby rate was identified for us to provide EMS medical standby. At this time, we don't have any contracts or anything in place to bill that rate. However, I wanted to set us up for the future as we grow and continue to get busier and busier, and our expenditures continue to increase. I think it's important for us to identify that a lot of these things that we're providing are free of charge, and we incur expenses when we do that. So, as we continue to grow, I think one of the conversations we'll be having in coming months, years, is making sure that we're reimbursed at some rate when we're providing those services, especially multiple hours at a time. So, so identified. There's a what would I want to look for? A study, I guess, right? A regional study is what you want to call it, that will kind of identify what the the mean and averages for the Midwest region, which involves a good chunk of 10 or 12 states. So our rates that I proposed I think our appropriate increase, our last rate increase was in 2017, so it's been a while. So most of our rates are actually a little bit under that average, so we were able to keep it under the average, but also set an appropriate rate for our reimbursement and our expenditures, so.
Do you really want to be under the average? Should we be at the average?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I've dealt with this data for a lot of years, and it's kind of skewed, because we're measuring ourselves against small rural ambulance services, but then also large municipalities like St. Louis and Detroit and Kansas City.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's just so I feel like I took also into account kind of a personal account of what people are doing more locally, I guess, in eastern Nebraska, because I don't want us to be charging $500 more than
Exactly.
an equivalent ALS service like Waterloo or something like that. So,
Okay.
so it kind of kept us in the ballpark. So.
Any other questions of Brandon? Kevin?
There's any questions for me about the rides?
We're all laid out here.
Not big increases at all. I guess I would make a motion to adjust the, both pay scales. The A and B, is that two separate motions you want, the master fee schedule, or is?
It can be one.
It's a resolution that would adopt these changes.
I would make that motion.
I'll second that. Any other questions, comments? Roll call.
Creachy,
Yes.
Nagel,
Yes.
Luke,
Yes.
Warford,
Yes.
Rappel,
Yes.
Ideas.
Yes. Okay, number 5, waiver of separate submittals for the final plot of Destiny Campus, a replot of Colony, Lot 2, Colony subdivision replat, Lot 6, Kennedy College subdivision, and the east half of vacated Oak Street, lying north of the north boundary line of 13th, contiguous to Lot 2, Colony subdivision replat, all in the city of Wahoo. This is part of the agreement that we have worked up with the owners of the campus, and you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I mean, the principal driver of this is parking connected to the gym improvement space, right? Which is to say, when the gym ultimately is improved, it will have certain parking requirements. Those parking requirements have to be directly tied to that property, so there needs to be some work done in order to merge those various lots and things. I know separate from this, we're gonna have to deal with some utility easements and that sort of thing that will also need to be recorded to off of the other properties they own and to this property. But that's kind of separate from the specific replat itself. And again, this one is just the waiver of the separate submittals at this time.
Right, so instead of having a preliminary plating process and then moving to final, Travis and I agree with recommending, I'm not speaking for you, but with recommending that you waive the process so that we can move directly to the final plating process.
So moved. Any other discussion? Roll call.
Warford,
Yes.
Creachy,
Yes.
Ideas.
Yes.
Nagel,
Yes.
Rappel,
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Mayor's comments, items not listed. I don't have any comments unless somebody has some questions. Council members, any comments?
While we're on South Campus, where are we at with our project?
Ye-
With
next-
Mr. Sullivan?
Next week, that will be revived. I've kind of been busy with
Okay.
budget.
Budget's almost
Okay.
over.
Any
2
other
weeks.
comments?
What?
And next week or 2 weeks, when we get back together?
2
Give us an
weeks.
update? Okay.
27.
What?
Okay.
Well, I'm just saying, next week it will be on my plate to
Okay.
make sure we,
Closer to the minute?
Yeah.
Is that a road?
If there is no other comments, motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Motion
Colony
to
Gold
adjourn,
says
all
we
in favor,
own their roads.
stand.
I like to tell clients that the only thing at the top of the list is whatever is an